Hello, and welcome to this first preview video for Hamlet. Again, these videos, strange. They're not meant to just tell you everything that happens before watching a film version or a stage production. What I hope for is to help those of you who are experiencing this play for the first time, help teachers maybe with a resource, but to help you experience the play through reading and watching good productions of it in a way that's not frustrating, in a way that makes you feel like you're grounded in what's going on. So that's my hope. And what I would suggest is to watch these preview videos and then experience any of the really great stage productions that are easily available online. There's a great radio drama on YouTube with Ken Branagh. But that's how I would go about it. So this is the edition I use with my seniors in high school. It has good notes and it's inexpensive. The Cambridge school editions are excellent. You know, if you're doing a deep dive and spending a long time, and money's less of an object, but the Folger is good for me. So the pagination and the act and scene and line numbers I use will be from the Folger. So if you have a different edition, the layout might be slightly different. Okay, so before we start Hamlet, I'd like you to think about the world of your school right now. If you're an adult in a workplace, you could do the same exercise. We're all in a particular country. So I'm in America, and not surprisingly, America has a variety of challenges now, both domestically and abroad, and both are in the news constantly. They're the oxygen we're breathing. I live in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has its challenges right now, whether that's a particular COVID response, whether it's education reform. So the state I'm in has challenges. I live in Peabody, Massachusetts, which is a mix of a working class community and an upper middle class community. You can live in $1 million house, and you can live as a homeless person temporarily in a motel in my town. So my town's pretty interesting. I live in a pretty boring neighborhood. My family and I live in a townhouse. So oddly, one of the challenges I think is lack of community and connection in the townhouse. My community is a boys' prep school on the North Shore of Massachusetts. It has what I would argue is a variety of challenges. And a variety of awesome things. I have 2 senior English classes that are wildly different from each other. And then think of you. What are you dealing with most right now? What challenge are you confronting most regularly right now? Is it an identity challenge? Is it a financial challenge? Is it a personal challenge? Is it a family challenge? What is it? I mention all of these things because if you're new to Shakespeare or have never liked it, one of the many challenging things to reading Shakespeare is beginning any of these plays. As far as I know, with the exception of Richard III, where Richard III, the protagonist, actually begins the play with the "Now is the winter of my discontent" soliloquy, Shakespeare's major plays generally don't begin with the protagonist. They begin with giving us a feeling of the world we're about to enter into. Romeo and Juliet begins with essentially nameless servants from the 2 rival families, and you immediately get a sense of the tension. Macbeth begins with witches, and you immediately get a sense of the supernatural elements of the world. Henry V, really strangely, begins with a group of bishops arguing about what legal rights England has towards France. It's really tedious and can be played comically, and it ends up really becoming, the heartbeat of that entire play in a lot of ways. So what do we have in Hamlet? Everybody talks about Hamlet's inner life, and for good reason, but Hamlet's also takes place in a country. We'll learn it's Denmark, in a place called Elsinore. Hamlet has the world of Hamlet, the world of Denmark, as we'll learn, just literally is in constant sort of conflict with Norway. So that's the international challenge. And we're going to get a feel of its domestic challenges. We're going to get a feel for the different mini communities and mini families within the world of Hamlet. And then not just Hamlet's problems, but all the different characters' crises. So I just want to point out that as distant as some of this text may feel upon first glance, you can start as a starting point. You can say, well, what are the larger sort of geopolitical challenges? What are the challenges within the kingdom? What are the challenges in the communities within the kingdom? And then what are the challenges within the characters? So I want to state that as a sort of starting point so we don't get overly overwhelmed. Okay, so in the very beginning of the play, I'm on page 7 of the Folger. And we could do this. We could do this on and on. We could probably do a video on every page or every 2 lines. The play begins amazingly with just a guard, a sentinel outside of the kingdom, outside the castle at Elsinore. And the guards are changing. It's the nighttime. And it's the changing of the guard. And Bernardo says, "Who's there?" Which to me is the question of the play. And the other curiously Italian named Danish person says, Francisco says, "Nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself. Long live the king, Bernardo, he." So it's so dark that they don't recognize each other. They know each other, but they can't see each other. Ask yourself, why would a play begin in the middle of the night with the changing of the guard? What is this world like? What are these people worried about? And you might ask, the most basic question is, why would you need to guard a kingdom? So that's something to consider. There are clearly, like, military geopolitical concerns here that are being said without even saying them. If you skip down to the next page, Marsalis shows up, and we learn that we're in Denmark, liegeman to the Dane, so we're in Denmark. I wouldn't overly worry about historically where we are. There is a historical Hamlet, and if you read Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare, you can get a lot of information on that. So I wouldn't obsess about it. Like if you're reading this or if you're teaching this, the historicity of it is really the least interesting thing. Without worrying about what every word means, and if you have me for a teacher, I will not be quizzing and testing you on every little piece of minutia, so relax, okay? Always focus on the big picture. The first time you read a difficult text like this, have a 20,000-foot view, okay? Just figure out, the basic plot points, what people are worried about, what questions you have. There will be time to deep dive and ask bigger questions, but really early on, we're just keeping our head above water, figuratively speaking, right? So in line 26, we have Horatio saying, "What? Has this thing appeared again tonight?" And if you're one of my students, underline the lines I read in these preview videos, okay? Curiously, Horatio doesn't say, "What? Has this ghost appeared again tonight?" We're waiting. We're waiting to get that information. Spoiler alert. And we learn, Marsalis says, Horatio says, "But 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him." Horatio is a scholar and a classmate of Hamlet's, and is a sort of skeptic, right? He's not going to believe in the ghost unless he sees it. "Will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us." So the other guards have seen the ghost twice. Horatio won't believe them. Marsalis continues, "Therefore I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night." So that's why Horatio, the scholar who's not a guard, is there. That if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it. And Horatio again confirms his skepticism. Tush, 'twill not appear. So the first concern implicitly in the play is that we need armed guards, presumably because there's a threat from somewhere, we don't know yet. Now they're concerned about the frequent presence of a ghost. We don't know who it is yet, but the frequent presence of a ghost. So I'm skipping a lot. The ghost appears really quickly. and they speak to it, and the ghost escapes. And then if you go to line if you go to line 90, we get Horatio giving the long backstory. He's giving us the backstory of why there's an armed guard. In line 90, Horatio says, our last king, whose image even but now appears to us. Okay, underline that on line 91. Our last king, whose image even now but appears to us. They're seeing the ghost of the last king. The last king's name was Hamlet. This is Hamlet Sr., Hamlet, our Hamlet's dad. Was, as you know, by Fortinbras of Norway, thereto pricked on by a most emulate pride, dared to the combat. Okay, so without getting worried, Horatio is really easy to get lost in. Horatio is a scholar. He loves hearing himself talk in a different way than Hamlet loves it. He is sort of like that guy you might meet in college who just loves using all the words, all the big words. So don't worry about getting lost. What we know is that Hamlet, the Hamlet family in Denmark, has a long, not great, somewhat cyclical, violent history with Norway and the Fortinbras family. So that's really, really important. And this is why that Denmark has an armed guard. This is why, as we learn, Denmark is constantly preparing for war, day and night, even on Sundays. They're making cannons, they're making all this stuff. So right away, there's geopolitical anxiety and the presence of the former king as a ghost. Okay, so if you skip ahead, I want to go to actually line 173, because Marsalis says the ghost leaves. The morning is coming out. There was a myth that ghosts could not appear in the daytime. So the cock crows for the coming of the morning and the ghost disappears. And Marsalis says in 173, 172, it faded on the crowing of the cock. And then we get this this sort of superstition that I've read Shakespeare invents here. Marsalis says, some say that ever against that season comes wherein our Savior's birth is celebrated, Christmas. This bird of dawning singeth all night long. And then they say no spirit dare stir abroad. The nights are wholesome, that no planets strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm, so hallowed and so gracious is that time. Marsalis paints an interesting picture here of both Christian and sort of pagan imagery. We're entering into a world that has geopolitical anxiety, military anxiety, the presence of ghosts, and then even what they believe. We have people who believe in the presence of ghosts. We have skeptics. We have Christian moments. We have pagan moments. It's an incredibly messy opening. Horatio responds, so I have heard and do in part believe it. And I wrote in my margins, how does he come to believe anything, this guy, right? And then he has this famous line, but look, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill. Okay, so finally, we're gonna actually understand something Horatio says. And he says, break we our watch up, and by my advice, let us impart what we have seen tonight, meaning the apparition of the ghost, unto young Hamlet. It's first mention of him. For upon my life, this spirit, dumb to us, so the ghost doesn't talk to them, will speak to him. So that's the plan. Okay, so really interesting, complicated, messy opening with lots of layers, right? But the basic plot point going forward is that these guys plan on telling Hamlet about his father's ghost appearing in the night. Now, and think about that initial slide about the challenges in your country, in your state, in your town. Now we go into diplomacy. Now we go into the Danish royal house. And just without worrying about a deep dive into what every single word means, and every single image means, and every single illusion means. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is just, again, consider the feelings and the reactions, because just get a feeling for the house. So we get in the very beginning of scene 2, go to the very beginning of scene 2, we get the king. He's not really called Claudius, I think, except for one time, but we know his name's Claudius. He's old Hamlet's brother, the former king's brother, so young Hamlet's uncle. He's speaking to a bunch of his fellow counselors, Danes, noblemen, and he has a challenge. We're going to learn very quickly that Hamlet Sr., we know, is dead because, we just saw his ghost, right? That Hamlet Sr. is dead. And that the circumstances of his death aren't clear. That's fine. We also learn almost immediately that Claudius has married Gertrude, who was Hamlet Sr.'s wife, his widow, and that this has happened quickly. So Claudius, the new king, has to sort of politically and diplomatically mourn the loss of the former king while keeping morale up in his kingdom and putting on a strong front. So that's his challenge. Watch how brilliantly he does it. And I'm not going to read this whole speech, but scene 2 begins, though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, this is old Hamlet, the memory be green. So you're thinking he's on drugs. Memories can't be green. Think of unripe fruit being green. So if a memory is green, it's new, right? This means the king has recently died, and that it us befitted to bear our hearts in grief and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Meaning, we have every right, it's natural for us to weep and to mourn the loss of our king. Yet, big Shakespeare word, right? Yet, so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrances of ourselves. Discretion fought with nature. It is natural to mourn the loss of our king. But to use discretion and common sense and thought, he's saying we have to, move on and be pragmatic. Then he says, therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state. So then he just acknowledges the queen, his new wife, the former king's wife. The speech goes on to refer to young Fortinbras of Norway being a threat. And what we see Claudius do early on, pay attention to what you think Claudius is good at. Who is this guy as king? Is he a good king? That's what I would pay really close attention to. If you want, you in your books can make little notes, like the first several pages of, it's actually scene 2, lines 1 to 132. Claudius gives sort of his version of recent events. Okay, so job number 1 is on page 23 of the Folger. It's line 35. So job number 1 is diplomacy. And we have Cornelius and Voldemond, 2 diplomats that he sends to Norway to sort of quell any possible violence. And Claudius says, you, good Cornelius, and you, Voldemond, for bearers of this greeting to old Norway, this is the uncle of Fortinbras, young Fortinbras, giving to you no further personal power to business with the king more than the scope of these dilated articles allow. Claudius says, don't improvise. When you're meeting with foreign dignitaries, do what I'm telling you to do. So maybe a conversation can be, what does that say about Claudius, that he's aware of that, right? Okay, that's job number 1. Then he turns to other people we meet. We meet some other folks. Don't worry about getting lost. Anybody that Shakespeare cares about, you meet several times, and any point he wants to make, he tells you clearly, I promise. So this is Polonius, who is Claudius's sort of right-hand man. This is Ophelia, his daughter, and this is Laertes, his son. Job number 1 is Laertes on the bottom of page 23, line 51. Laertes says to Claudius, my dread lord, your leave and favor to return to France, from whence though willingly I came to Denmark to show my duty in your coronation, yet now I must confess that duty done, my thoughts and wishes bend again towards France. He said, I was home for your coronation when you became king. No mention of Claudius, the former king's, of Hamlet Sr.'s funeral, curiously. But he says, I want to go back to France. The king asks, do you have your father's permission? Yes, great. It all happens relatively quickly. So we have a diplomatic interaction, we have a sort of inner circle interaction, and then we finally meet Hamlet. Okay? And we have his opening line on page 25, line 67. King says, but now my cousin Hamlet and my son. And Hamlet, with a pun right away, a little more than kin. We're a little more than just that, but less than kind. So kind, like differing in kind, and also kind is behavior, right? Pay attention to the interaction Gertrude has with Hamlet and the king has with Hamlet. Their goal, and you might have experienced this if you're a kid, or if you remember being a kid, if you're an adult watching this, where say there's like a conflict or an argument, it's Thanksgiving, you're hosting Thanksgiving or a birthday, and your mother or father say, look, behave yourself, like pretend we're happy, right? Sometimes in families, when people are coming over, there's a little theater that goes on. Gertrude and Claudius, particularly Claudius, are aware of the publicness of this moment, and that Hamlet wearing black, mourning his father, is ruining this otherwise positive public moment. So I would just encourage you to pay attention. And that the queen basically says, why seems all this sadness so particular with thee? And Hamlet says in line 79, seems, madam, nay it is. I know not seems. And he basically says, I am not acting a part. I am showing I am mourning the loss of my father. We get Hamlet's first of four major great soliloquies, and I'm not good. I could have an hour deep dive just in the soliloquy, but it begins on page 29, line 133. Curiously, it ends a really wonderfully positive public moment for Denmark. And then the door slams and Hamlet's by himself. And I've read that psychologists have read this speech as an eerily authentic portrayal of clinical depression. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. I wish I could disappear into the earth. And then he wishes that God did not deem suicide to be a great sin, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. How weary, stale, flat. This is the line that, to me, I have a lot of loved ones who struggle with depression. I can't imagine a more accurate description of what depression feels like. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. And the world is an unweeded garden that grows to seed, and that it's only possessed by gross and rotten things. And he ends up riffing on his mother's very quick marriage, and that his mother was like, when his father died, his mother was like Niobe. And she wept for the loss of her children so much that she would just cry constantly. And that's how Gertrude was, Hamlet says. And then Hamlet says, within a month, she's married to the king. And he says, O most wicked speed, this is line 161, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. I don't know if anybody else considers this incestuous, the fact that Claudius marries his single ex-sister-in-law, but Hamlet certainly does. And then Hamlet's buddies and the guards that began the play come and speak to him about the ghost. And there's some really nice human moments here. And Hamlet commits to going with them to see if the ghost is there, to see if the ghost is real, and see if the ghost interacts with him. And he says, if it assume my father's noble person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. I'm going to suggest to really not worry about understanding, having answers, having thesis statements really ever in this play, but particularly early on. Please get used to the different levels of challenges, the geopolitical within the kingdom, many communities in the kingdom, and within the hearts of all the main characters. Relax, grab onto what you are curious about, and stay there. This is my chosen version to show my students because it's uncut and it's brilliant. So it's the Kenneth Branagh Hamlet. It's on Amazon Prime. The David Tennant one is excellent. Patrick Stewart's Claudius, Tennant's Hamlet. That's really good, and it employs a lot of video cameras to sort of show the paranoia within the kingdom. And then if you have Digital Theater Plus, which is an amazing service out of England, check it out. There's the RSC stage production from a few years ago with Papa Essiedu as Hamlet, and it's unreal. Really, really good. And then something I really recommend to do in class once in a while and to do for homework. There's an audio drama from, I think, the late 80s, early 90s with Kenneth Branagh, Judi Dench, Derek Jacobi, Emma Thompson, just on and on and on, John Gielgud. It's the whole play. So please don't read this silently on your own. Please read and listen with this. If you're ever asked to read Hamlet or if you're assigning it, please, please, please use this free YouTube resource. It is unreal. This was a long introduction to two scenes, but I really want to take our time here. I want us to take our time with these first few chunks of reading to get acclimated into this amazing world. I hope this helps. Thanks.